Hello, beautiful homemakers. We had just discussed in the last video mistakes that drive men away, and I want to delve into that last paragraph a bit more. So let me recap the most relevant point. If he discovers that you are naturally appreciative of others, then he will not fear that you will ridicule him or show contempt when he confides his ideals and ambitions to you. If, on the contrary, he suspects that you are naturally critical and scornful, with an eye open for every fault you can find in those around you, he will be afraid to expose his own intimate feelings to your criticism and contempt. How are we going to avoid the mistake of constant criticism? First, we have to decide what type of wife we are going to be. Am I going to be the kind of wife that builds him up or tears him down? Proverbs 14:1 tells us that the wise woman builds her house, but the foolish woman tears it down with her own hands. And when you tear down your husband, when you berate him or even think bad thoughts about him, you are tearing down your own house. You are setting your marriage up for failure. The trap of constant criticism is easy to fall into, especially with your husband and even with your children. And so we must guard against it. And we need to ask for forgiveness when we do it. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you married a very careful man, and you liked how careful he was. It made you feel so secure. He has his checklists, and he double checks things. He researches the best way to do things. He's careful with his money, etc. So you marry him, and everything is bliss for the first few years. But then his carefulness begins to grate on you. His double checking just begins to annoy you. One day you and your little family are headed out to dinner, and the wind is colder than you expected, and you dress to look cute, not for warmth. And your little ones aren't dressed warmly enough either. So you all start racing off to the restaurant entrance, but as you approach the door, you realize that your husband isn't with you. He is standing in front of the car looking at it, checking to see if it's parked in the best place or something. Then you notice that he's actually heading back to the car, pulling on the door handle to make sure that it's locked. And you're screaming inside your head, "Of course it's locked, idiot! Get to the door already! I'm freezing! Why is he such a what? A jerk? Or why is he such a careful man? Isn't that one of the reasons why you married him? Because he was so careful? Because his carefulness made you feel secure? Remember that whatever attracted you to him in the first place can easily become a thorn in your side. If you let it. If you feed those thoughts. And remember this, it runs both ways. What he found attractive in you at first can drive him nuts later. So when you start to grumble in your head, why does he do? Why is he such a dope? Why? You must nip that in the bud and take it to Christ to renew your mind. Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. That's from Romans 12, verse 2, NLT version. When you catch yourself denigrating someone you love in your mind, no matter who it is, you need to change your thoughts. Say a quick prayer for forgiveness and ask the Lord to transform your thinking. Instead, tell yourself, I am so glad I married such a careful man. What if we had exited the restaurant to discover that we had forgotten to lock our car and that it had been rifled through with such and such was stolen, like your child's favorite stuffed animal or something you left behind in the car? Then I want you to say to him, thank you for being so careful about our belongings. I admire that about you. I was so cold I ran into the restaurant. I'm glad that I can count on you to look out for our possessions. Next time I'll have to remember to bring a sweater so that we can walk up to the restaurant together and you can open that heavy door for me. There. You have just thanked him for what he did, built him up, and you hinted about how you would like the scenario to go in the future. Remember that sin begins in our mind with what we think about. We think a sinful thought before we act upon it, don't we? We may push away a bad thought, but if it comes back to us, we may then dwell upon it a little longer. And if we keep doing that, pretty soon it may not look quite as bad to us or as shocking to us as it did in the beginning. We've pondered the idea and thus become used to it. It may take days or it may take years, but what you dwell on affects how you act. We've talked before about this, that this is how adultery happens. You don't wake up one morning and decide to be with someone other than your spouse. No, the person who commits adultery has dwelt upon that scenario in his or her mind for weeks, months, or maybe even years. So, think the best thoughts about your husband or your boyfriend. And remember to praise him out loud. Remember to laugh a lot and to be joyful. Also, in the last video, I told you a story that I thought came from the book Dandelion Wine by Ray Bradbury. Well, I ordered the book, and that story doesn't appear to be in there. I've looked through it. I must have been either reading 2 books simultaneously, which I did a lot, or it was in another Ray Bradbury book. So sorry about that. I hope no one bought the book hoping to find that story in it, because I don't think it's there. I haven't been able to find it. Such a good story, I wish I knew where it did come from. Now we're going to go back to the secular pamphlets, but keep in mind that they are actually trying to warn you about falling into the too critical and quarrelsome trap, which the book of Proverbs speaks so much of. The authors want you to have a lovely and worthy character, and God wants you to have that too. It's mentioned many times throughout the Bible. We are finishing up chapter 13 of pamphlet 6 of the original 1922 Fascinating Womanhood pamphlets. This subsection is called Common Mistakes to Avoid. Consequently, you must not tell him about your quarrels with your acquaintances or about your poor opinion of this or that person. You must not betray envy or jealousy or scorn or contempt. You must not make light of anyone. This is good advice for everyone, but especially if you're a Christian. Even when you cannot approve of what someone does or says, you must show your appreciation of his motives and character. The more ability you manifest as a critic, the less inclined the man will be to expose himself to your criticism. And being critical is a really bad habit. It starts with little things and then it moves on to criticizing people. So if you've got that habit, nip it in the bud. We all go through a phase where we do that. You need to take a look at yourself and stop that behavior if you're doing it. He likes to believe that his confidences will meet with a generous and admiring interpretation. not with a mean and fault-finding one. And I know a woman who is that way. She did finally get married, but she went through several boyfriends. She was a beautiful woman. They were very attracted to her, and she could hold their interest. But at some point, the conversation always took a nasty turn, where she was critical of people in her extended family, people she worked with, people from school. It always took a sour note, to the point that I finally stopped having anything to do with her for quite a few years. She worked on herself, and she's no longer that way. At the time, she wasn't a Christian, and she is a Christian now, and she is trying to have more Christ-like behavior, and it shows. Also, if you are married, darlings, married men list fault-finding as the number one reason they are unhappy in their marriage. So let's be much less critical and perfectionistic. A husband can easily turn the table on his wife, can't he? We are not perfect, yet we expect our men to be perfect. We don't want him to be critical. Oh, but it's fine if we're critical. We now begin to appreciate the importance of the lovely, worthy character which we advised you to develop in Chapter 5. You cannot arouse a man's interest unless you discover and appreciate the admirable things about his character. You cannot begin to appreciate these things adequately until after he has confided to you something about his inmost thoughts and feelings. He will seldom confide such matters to you unless you yourself have a sympathetic, appreciative, and beautiful character. Therefore, unless you acquire such a character, you may have great difficulty in arousing a man's interest. Because a beautiful woman who has a negative character, like negativity, snobbery, critical, is unappreciative, has no sympathy for others, who are yelling all the time, who are always unhappy, nothing pleases them, these types of women are ugly to all. A woman like that can easily catch a man's eye, but the interest will not be sustained. Without such a lovely, worthy character, you may indeed attract his attention, but you may not be able to arouse his interest. And you may have no opportunity whatever to create desire, convince his judgment, and secure action. These are the steps we talked about in Pamphlet 1, and we've been working on all the steps for quite a while now. It's easier if you just listen to the playlist, because then you get the whole book in order very quickly. But me reading it to you for the first time takes a while, so it's taken us a long time. For those that are just joining us, these are the 5 steps every single person goes through before making any kind of decision. And we talked about this in depth in Pamphlet 1. You will have to stop at the second of the 5 stages in the process of winning the man if you've got that negative character. The second stage is arousing interest, so you can attract attention, but without a lovely, worthy character, you won't be able to keep his interest. And then you'll never get to creating desire or overcoming his judgment of should I or shouldn't I, well, pros and cons. You've got to get over these natural barriers. And this is what the entire Fascinating Womanhood series is about. And the last step being securing action, where he wants to go out with you with the intention of marriage in mind. You will have to stop at the second of the 5 stages in the process of winning the man if you don't have a worthy character. There is no use, accordingly, in your proceeding any further until you go back to Chapter 5, review it carefully, and practice the principles it elucidates. The next subsection is called Inspiring the Man's Confidence. In fact, there is no better way in which you can undermine reserve and encourage confidence than by playing the game outlined in Chapter 5, especially the part about finding something appreciative to say about everyone you know, and finding the good things to admire in everyone's character. You must practice this art. Play this game upon everyone, everywhere. You must make the playing of it a part of your personality, always looking for the best in a person. I can think of a pretty negative person I know. I don't like to go out with her anywhere because she's such a complainer and she's always finding fault with the service. And I remember her touting on social media, I just had the worst service, and I contacted headquarters and I gave them the name of this rude girl. You know, the girl was probably just having a really bad day with a lot of customers and probably did something really slightly wrong. Now, maybe she was a terrible employee. Maybe she really did need to be reported. But I doubt it, because this is a complaining, negative woman. It's tiresome to be around her. Let's give people the benefit of the doubt. Remember when I read the book to you about why he didn't call you back? There was one man in there who married a woman who he said that when they got bad service, he was upset because he had planned this perfect date and the service was lousy, and she was just like, oh, don't worry about it. The woman is probably just overwhelmed. She's having a bad day. Let's not let it ruin our night. I'm fine. It's just giving me more time to be with you. She just totally spun it, and he loved her encouraging, joyful, cheerful attitude, and that got her the second date. You cannot play the game with a particular man whom you wish to interest and then stop playing it in the privacy of your home when you are not on exhibition. Unless you keep in practice, unless the appreciation comes from an appreciative character, that worthy character, it will not have the convincing stamp of sincerity. But when you have learned to wrap your little brother around your finger, and your dad and your mother and your landlady or your employer or your maid or the little child next door and the iceman and the delivery boy, you will have no difficulty at all in doing the same thing to almost any man you meet. The problem of making him believe you have an appreciative character, making him feel that he can confide in you without ridicule, making him anxious to share your appreciation, will vanish into thin air. He will begin to confide things about himself without any conscious invitation on your part. Practice makes perfect. Search for the good qualities in everyone you meet and show your appreciation of them. This is the easiest way to develop a beautiful, confidence-inspiring, and adorable character in yourself. Unless you do this, it will be impossible for you to act the part of Angela Human, the woman who is the most attractive to men. Fascinating womanhood. So these character-building traits used to be introduced to young girls in the books they read. Think of Louisa May Alcott, especially in her book Jack and Jill and the Old-Fashioned Girl. There's so many Louisa May Alcott books that show this type of character. All of the Anne books, Anne of Green Gables, and of course Pollyanna. Pollyanna is built around this game. I know we talk about, oh, don't be such a Pollyanna, or maybe you've seen the Disney movie and you're like, oh, that's too sweet. But actually the book is very good, perfect for, 10 to 30-year-olds or even older, because it is a timeless classic. You should read it to your children, especially your girls. Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm is another one who exhibits these traits. The three most famous Frances Hodgson Burnett books, The Little Princess, The Secret Garden, and Little Lord Fauntleroy. All wonderful books and will help you be more cheerful and find the best in people. Absolutely lovely books that you should read to your children. Let's not forget Heidi. Another beautiful classic story, well worth reading. These children have lovely characters, and then they grow up to be lovely women. Also, every single Grace Livingston Hill book imparts this kind of worthy character wisdom. Right now I'm reading Marcia Schuyler, which is based on a true story that happened in Grace's family long before she was born. And the main character, Marcia, is definitely a fascinating woman with a worthy character, whereas her sister Kate, while she has many fascinating womanhood traits, has an unworthy character. And these books created lovely women in society, and I don't think children are reading lovely books anymore. There are books that are popular in our schools that are the opposite, the absolute opposite of having a gracious, lovely, worthy character. Children are reading trash. Young people are reading trash. People in their 20s and 30s, if they read at all, are reading or watching trash. You need to surround yourself with good, uplifting books. And I'm going to talk to you again about Grace Livingston Hill. She wrote over 100 books, and each one will make you want to be a better person. They're very uplifting. You come away saying, wow, I want to have a lovely character like this heroine in this story. I want to be that joyful. I want to get that much done. It's a lovely world in these storybooks, and you can be a storybook wife and a storybook mother. I know, because that's how I feel my life has been. I was lucky enough to have a pretty idyllic childhood, and I know that's rare, and I greatly appreciate it. Then I was able to read all these lovely stories for years. I went through a very hard 17 years with my first husband, so my life hasn't always been rainbows and roses. You would be surprised what I've gone through. I'm not just this little homemaker that hasn't seen the worst life has to offer. But since my second marriage and finding even more wonderful books like Grace Livingston Hill and Fascinating Womanhood and Secrets of Fascinating Womanhood and other books, The Surrendered Wife, The Empowered Wife, those are excellent books. You can choose to become a storybook wife and a storybook mother. I don't have one regret in raising my son because I did everything I wanted to do with him. I shared every day with him. We had lovely days. We didn't have toddler tantrums. I know that sounds crazy, but I was very strict when he was little. I only had to discipline him like 5 times, but I trained him. And that's the difference. Most children melt down because they're not trained. Well, how do you train a child? We'll have to talk about that later. But I learned how to train children from women that had a lot of children. I just didn't make it up on my own. I went to experts. If a woman had 6 or more children, then I would listen to what she had to say, and if her children were well-behaved. I only went to people who had well-behaved children. So I trained my son when he was little, and we had a wonderful time at home, homeschooling, playing, having people over, and we didn't go through any teenage angst either. He, at 19, is doing wonderfully. So these authors that I named are all very worthy authors that you should begin reading now, especially before bed. Do a chapter of the Bible before bed and do a chapter of a worthy book. I'm sure you know all about habit stacking. My new habit, it's been this way for a while, is I brush my teeth, I take my shower at night, I put my weights in the bathroom, I lift them every morning, every evening, just a few repetitions. Then I have about 3 books where I read 1 chapter of each while I'm standing in the bathroom because I sit too much during the day. And then I have this alone time. Nobody bothers me when the bathroom door is closed. And some books I just read a page. especially the harder ones. When I'm learning something, there's a lot of information. That I just read a page. Another book I'm savoring, so I'm reading it slowly. And another book is edifying. It's a feel-good book, like the Grace Livingston Hill books or any of the other authors I named. Get in the habit of reading for an hour each night. Put your phone down. Your phone needs to be in the kitchen by 9 o'clock, plugged in, nowhere near your bed. Then you spend at least an hour reading, and then you will sleep better. I think it's so sad that most people will never read any of these classic, beautiful books, or really read any book. They'll just, fall asleep to YouTube or the television. This summer, won't you read to your children, or just read these books to yourself? Try Elizabeth Enright's Gone Away Lake and Return to Gone Away. They are such fascinating children's stories that are delightful for adults. Mark Twain said, "If an adult can't delight in a book, don't have a child read it," and I fully agree with him. Elizabeth Enright has such a way with words, and in her books, she tells so many stories within a story, and she uses words that pertain to animals for inanimate objects. In Gone Away Lake, on page 38, she says, "A large herd of furniture grazed on a red carpet." She has lots of plays on words, and she even uses words that we've never heard of before, and it is just delightful. I liked Return to Gone Away even better than Gone Away Lake. I wrote that it's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful book, even better than Gone Away, and it takes place 1 year later in 1958. These characters live. She also wrote the book The Saturdays. You might have heard of that one, but it has 3 sequels. The 4-Story Mistake, Then There Were 5, and Spiderweb for 2. That's a fun mini mystery. I said, best book of them all, but read them in order and end with this one. Randy tore open the envelope. Inside it was a sheet of matching blue paper on which a poem was written. She read it aloud to Oliver. It's clues. This clue must be uncovered before many days have elapsed. The sun changes each day, so where my shadow falls this week, that is the spot where you must seek, and not a word to anyone. It's a fun story for summer. And that brings me to Peggy Parrish books. Key to the Treasure. Wonderful book. I read this book as a child and the other 4 books that go with it. And when my son was just an infant, he was asleep on me in the recliner. And I looked over on Grandma's bookshelf and I saw this original book, Key to the Treasure. And I read it while he napped and just loved it. And at that time, I printed out the clues that were in this book for him to solve when he got old enough. I printed out the clues and then we solved them together, and it was so much fun. And I hid items and the clues in pouches in our backyard, just like in the book. And in the final treasure, instead of what was in the book, I gave him some chocolate. It said I waited 6 years until my boy could solve this with me. Oh, he was 8.5. It's such a great story with lovable characters. The sequel is Clues in the Woods, then The Haunted House, and I read that one when I was little. Never forgot that book. It's so enchanting. Not scary at all. Just fun. Pirate Island Adventure came after that. Then The Mystery of Hermit Dan. And finally, The Ghosts of Cougar Island, which of course, not scary. And last, I want to mention to you books by Catherine Woolley, especially Jenny and the New Girl. Jenny is spelled Ginnie. Every girl should read this. It's about a new girl coming and Jenny feeling left out when this new girl bonds with her best friend. The other book I think you would delight in reading with your daughter, especially around age 9, is Jenny and the Cooking Contest. They're just delightful. All the Jenny books are. your daughter will enjoy reading them. But I think Jenny and the New Girl and Jenny and the Cooking Contest you would also enjoy. There is only one Jenny book that I do not recommend. It was written much later, and it went off the rails. I really disliked it. It was called Jenny and the Mystery Light. It's the only one I don't recommend. Books like the ones I've listed help make your life beautiful because it transports your mind to a higher plane of lovely thoughts. Now, it was probably because I grew up on these lovely stories that I have always looked for the best in everyone and in every situation. Whenever someone says something negative, I immediately can see the alternative. If they say something negative, I noticed that the driver just dropped them off and he didn't come in. It was insinuated that he must not be a very good person. And it's like, no, maybe he didn't come in because he didn't feel like he was invited. And they're like, oh, maybe you're right. I also remember that when I was dating my husband, he complained about the area we had to drive through to reach the freeway. And so he said, I'd rather go the long way. It's much nicer. But then when we took the shortcut, he said, every single home has a broken down car in the driveway. Because he's a car guy. He notices that kind of thing. I replied, but every single home also has a rose bush. I loved going that way because I only saw the flowers, the roses. The last subsection of Chapter 13 of Pamphlet 6 is called Secrets That Are Shared. It will also be necessary, if you wish to break down the man's reserve and encourage his confidence, that you hold sacred the thoughts and feelings of others, that what is confided to you will never be exposed to the criticism or ridicule of others who are not so appreciative, unless he thinks that he is confiding his inmost hopes and ambitions to one who will not betray them to others. The man will not confide them to you, no matter how sure he is of your personal appreciation. For after you had betrayed his confidence, he would be exposed to the very misunderstanding and scorn which he seeks to avoid. In showing your appreciation of others, therefore, you must not use the method of uncovering secrets which you have been told in confidence. If you disclose the secrets of others, or anything personal, the man will take it for granted that you will disclose his confidences also, and he will be careful not to confide anything to you, and will give you no opportunity to appreciate the things that count about himself. I'm thinking of a friend from college who would do this. She would start talking about personal things about other people. And we had gone on a date, her boyfriend, and my boyfriend. And she had been going with this guy for a while. He really liked her, or she really liked him, and she thought things were going well. But after this date, he broke up with her. I instantly knew why. She started disparaging another person. Just as a topic of conversation, I said, so, how is so-and-so? Well, I got an earful, and it wasn't nice. And I think this man could see the future that, she's always doing this. She's always disparaging people. She's a snob. And that gets old really quickly. But she has become a Christian, and she has grown up, and now she's married. I don't hear any more of the disparaging remarks. To summarize, there are 3 ways in which you can encourage a man to confide to you something sacred about himself. First, by showing an appreciative and friendly interest in him. Second, by showing that you appreciate others, that you have an appreciative character. And third, by holding sacred the confidences of others. This being done, the man will have no hesitation in confiding to you something of the inner things that matter most to him. Now, when a man does this, when he does disclose something about himself which you can use as the basis of your appreciation of his character, you must not imagine that his reserve has disappeared altogether. Your response to his uncovering of his ideals must be appreciative. If you do not agree with his ideals, you must appreciate the character and motives behind them. But, my darlings, if you can't agree with his ideals, then that is not the man for you. You need to run. You need to be with the man whose ideals you can appreciate. Otherwise, you're just not on the same page. You must use the occasion to discover the good and admirable in him, and especially the manly. And you must emphasize the contrast between the manliness and your tender femininity. Otherwise, his first confidence will never be followed by another. But if your response is what he has been led to expect, he will add another confidence and another, until at least, if your reaction is never disappointing, he will lay bare before you every motive, ideal, and hope that stirs within him. Appreciation is too rare for him to deny it to himself, once he is sure that he can enjoy it without reservation. But underlying that desire for appreciation is always lurking that reserve, ready to spring out at the first sign of indifference or criticism, even when the lack of appreciation is only apparent in the girl's attitude toward other people. You can therefore understand how difficult it is for a girl with an unlovely, fault-finding, or indifferent character to keep the reserve in the background and to maintain the man's interest. It's almost impossible. These are the women that don't get married, because who wants to marry a fault-finding woman? Of course, many of us say, well, I found no fault with them until after we were married. That's human nature, and we have to keep it in check. So your first assignment is to look for the good in the man you are interested in or are dating, or your husband, but know that you can also raise a man's ideals, because men oftentimes put women on a pedestal that we have the better nature, the more idyllic nature, the more idealized nature. Like we expect the best from people, and they wouldn't expect us to cheat. We're more on a pedestal. So let's say that he does a lot of work and he gets paid in cash, but he doesn't want to report that cash. You can raise his ideals in talking about, not shaming him, but talking about how God honors honesty, and he doesn't reward thieves. There was a woman in one of my homeschooling groups, and her husband was a handyman, and he would be paid in cash, and he was a Christian, and he reported every dime that he made, but he wasn't really going anywhere. He needed a better paying job. And his wife said to him, we just found out that handymen aren't to be paid more than $500 for a job. That's the law. And you've been taking more than $500 for a job. Even though that's what we're owed, I don't think you should take jobs that are going to cause you to break that law anymore. She raised his ideals, and he agreed with her. And he said, okay, I'm not going to take any more jobs that would push my pay to over $500 per job. And within like a month, he was offered a much better position with benefits from another company. Or if you have a man working in the medical industry and he has anything to do with euthanasia or abortion, if he sees no problem with that, you have got to move on, because this man has a soul problem. You want a quality man. You're not looking for a rich man or a handsome man. You're looking for a worthy man, just as you have to be worthy for him. Before I met my husband, there was a man that I could admire his drive and his ambition, but I could not condone his ideals. He knew that proverb, "A fool and his money are soon parted," and he had a business that, to me, preyed upon the poor by offering exorbitant interest loans. So while his business was legal, in my book, and with my idealism, and with my knowledge of Bible scriptures, I felt that his business was usurious. The exorbitant interest he charged to me was usury. Since I have a strong financial background and had studied the ethics of a business like this, and most importantly, I knew what the Bible said about usury, I chose not to go out with him, and I decided that I would much rather marry a poor man with ambition than a rich man that preyed on others with his business. This man did not have Christ, and he was on his way to being the next Mr. Scrooge, while pretending to himself that he was just offering a service that people willingly partook of. And that is the end of Pamphlet 6. We will start Pamphlet 7 next time.